Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth.
I want you to know that I'm signing now, as we speak, Israel's official recognition of Somaliland and its right of self-determination. Our friendship is seminal and historic.
Somaliland is a former British colony. It initially formed the Somali Republic with the Italian-administered territory of Somalia. But feelings of marginalization and a coup in Mogadishu led to a war of independence in the 1980s. Somaliland declared independence from Somalia in 1991 and has pushed for international recognition for decades. It has its own currency, army, police, and it maintains diplomatic relations with several countries, including the United Kingdom, Ethiopia, and Taiwan. But Israel is the first country to officially recognize Somaliland.
Somaliland has received its first formal international recognition as a sovereign and independent state. This development affirms an objective reality that has long existed.
For its part, Somalia's foreign ministry denounced Israel's recognition of Somaliland as a deliberate attack on its sovereignty, while the African Union warned the move set a dangerous precedent.
One of the things that immigrants are most likely to say when they flee to a new country is that their old country was a place of strength. It was a place that didn't get pushed around, etc., etc. That's the main thing that they want to say because they have a creeping insecurity that the people in the new place that they fled to look at them and see weakness or cowardice. Whenever you have people who are newcomers to a place, and yet they insult the very people who are their host and call them lazy or say that there's something wrong with them or that they come from an inferior culture, that's projection. It's them voicing what they believe people say whenever talking about them. Fortunately, we have a number of on-code family who are not with the nonsense. Today's briefing, however, deals with the dangerous consequences that go along with living a lie. We've been told by a number of tethers from the Caribbean and Africa that they have a more cohesive culture than foundational black Americans. They have a culture of unity, they say. They use all kinds of highfalutin modifiers to heap praise on themselves. Well, don't look now, but the culture of unity just fractured. Ilhan Omar's home country of Somalia is under political attack. I know it's hard to tell considering how out of control things are there, but still. For decades now, there's been a part of Somalia called Somaliland that has not been under the complete political control of the Somalian government. And these guys are trying to declare themselves an independent state, just like South Sudan did. Tethers are always accusing foundational black Americans of being divisive. That's their favorite word to use when they're not able to actually counter what we say. But look at what's happening in Somalia right now. They're dividing themselves, literally. And you got foreign actors who are taking full advantage of it. They have a part of the country that's trying to break away from them. And now Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel would like to make this division permanent. This is divide and conquer. This is what happens when you have a broken loyalty system and you're in denial about it. You can try to brag and boast and act like you're so unified, but these white supremacists aren't fooled. They know the difference between true unity and people who are just faking it. But here, these Somalians thought that these white supremacists loved them. A lot of them thought that they were white supremacists. Benjamin Netanyahu is getting in front of the cameras and saying that Israel wants to be the first nation to recognize Somaliland as an independent state. I guess this is them trying to do their own counter to all of those countries that recognize Palestine as an independent state over the Israelis' objections. And just look at the blatantly deceptive language that the white media uses. Israel is the first nation to recognize Somaliland. Clearly the memo went out because all the white media is using the exact same words. Israel becomes the first country to recognize Somaliland, as if this was some sort of greatly anticipated event with a bunch of people who can't wait to jump on the bandwagon. That's the way they're reporting on it. Oh, you better not miss the bandwagon here. Israel's the first, but they won't be the last. This is what the white media does, as I've explained to you. 80+% of people who look at these online articles never make it past the headlines. So if you got a deceptive headline there, that's going to literally be all that 80% of people actually see. That'll be their only knowledge about it. When the reality is, Israel is the only country to quote-unquote recognize Somaliland. Literally nobody else has, not even the United States. Now, of course, being part of the axis of weevils, the U.S. will surely follow suit, along with a few of the U.S.'s irrelevant cronies like Micronesia and a few other vassal states who are totally dependent on U.S. foreign aid for their survival. Some irrelevant countries you never even heard of. But practically every other nation out there, including China, is condemning Israel for this. Why isn't that the headline? Shouldn't the headlines be, most countries on earth reject Israel's quote-unquote recognizing of Somaliland? Instead, the white media turns the facts upside down, ignores the rest of the world, and just says Israel's the first to recognize it. Because they want to give you the false impression that there's some sort of groundswell for this, as if everybody else is just waiting in line to do the same, when actually they're waiting in line to tell Israel that they're wrong. Obviously, this move by Israel is to set up what will amount to a political outpost in a Muslim country. This is the entire point of setting up puppet regimes, and why white supremacy spends so much money to do so. You can conquer an entire place without firing a single shot this way, but it certainly doesn't help matters that the people who are being colonized classify themselves as anything but black, and apparently they think that that kind of schizophrenia is cute. No, not all cultures are alike. And where is Ilhan Omar at while all this is going on? The racists over at Fox News, aren't even hiding what this is truly about, that this is about creating a puppet state in the heart of the Horn of Africa. They had a clown from the American Enterprise Institute, that's one of those right-wing so-called think tanks, which are funded by these racist billionaires and mega millionaires who funded the likes of Charlie Kirk. And this guy from AEI said that recognizing this breakaway region of Somalia was in the U.S.'s strategic interest. Now, how is Somalia fracturing in the U.S.'s strategic interest? It's just a poor part of an even poorer country, and yet this is how the white right is describing this secession, as something that people should be pressured to support because it's in the U.S.'s strategic interest. Yeah, when these clowns feel like they're getting away with something, they slip up and say the quiet part out loud. Notice that none of them can say that the alleged leaders of Somaliland are more honest or less corrupt, or that they share the same so-called values of the West. You notice how they don't say that? This is about manufacturing legitimacy. You have never heard them praising this Somaliland before now. You never even heard of it. And yet here they are all of a sudden, they're just gushing with all of this praise and accolades for them. About the only qualifications that false news could give for why Somaliland ought to be recognized as a legitimate country is that it wants closer ties to Israel. That's it. That's what they said. And I'm not making that up. That's all Fox News could name. And what did Fox News define as closer diplomatic engagement? Quote, positioning itself as a potential partner for U.S. and Israeli interests in the Horn of Africa. Now, gee, wasn't that shill from the American Enterprise Institute talking about how Somaliland being recognized was in the U.S.'s strategic interest? But now you got Fox News deciding, let's go ahead and build on top of that. Let's add to it. It's in the U.S.'s and Israel's interest. That's what's really important. The U.S. and Israeli interests. And what are the U.S.'s interests in the Horn of Africa? Fox News doesn't say, but ever since Mogadishu, we got a pretty good idea what the U.S. would like to have. A vassal state. Now, if Somaliland declared its so-called independence 30 plus years ago, and the rest of the world, including Israel, ignored that and didn't even pay it any attention, why all of a sudden is Benjamin Netanyahu so hot and bothered to go ahead and recognize them now? Why is he so eager to do it now? What's changed in the last couple of years that hadn't changed in the last 30 plus years? Now, when these people talk about U.S. strategic interest, why is it that Israel is the one who's being the tip of the spear on this one? If it's all about U.S. strategic interest, shouldn't, the U.S. be the ones taking the lead on this? But they're not. Israel is. And why is that? It's because, as the Jerusalem Post reported, over the last 2 years, Iran-backed Houthi forces in Yemen have attacked shipping lanes at the Gulf of Aden. What they're trying to do is to cripple Israel's war machine against the Gazans. Somaliland has a strategic deep-water port, which was recently expanded with UAE investment, and that combined with Israeli security architecture could become a Western foothold opposite Houthi-controlled Yemen, a pressure valve on Iranian influence, and a counterweight to radical Islamist penetration in the Horn of Africa. Israel didn't just recognize a state, it secured a strategic doorway at one of the world's maritime choke points. So this move is in large part about Israel trying to get the Houthis' foot out of their behinds. Almost exactly 2 years ago, the U.S. under Joe Biden began attacking the Houthis because of their attempts to try to blockade Israeli weapons coming through the Gulf of Aden. And I was telling you then that that operation was no small thing. It was not just some one and done, we're throwing some missiles at a couple of tents out there in the desert and that'll be it. I told you that this was the beginning of an ongoing effort. The U.S.'s airstrikes against the Houthis hadn't stopped, But they hadn't really been effective either. So now on cue, we see Benjamin Netanyahu slithering into the picture to execute the next step of the plan. And even the white media admits this is actually a U.S. strategic interest that's being executed here, not just Benjamin Netanyahu trying to expand more of his pathetic influence. So if you've been following my morning briefings, this doesn't come as really a surprise at all. This is just the continuation of exactly what I told you was going to happen. As usual, if you're not listening to the black media, then you're always going to be years behind. They don't want influence, they've already got influence now. What white power wants is total control, and that doesn't mean making people do what they want to do to a point. It means they are puppets on strings and don't so much as even think to disobey. They try to say that Somaliland has internal security, but of course they never define what that's supposed to mean. They also claim that this Somaliland has built democratic institutions. Well, we all know what that means. If you're obedient to white Western power, then you're democratic. And if you disobey them, then you're undemocratic, even if they're the only ones who say so. And isn't it interesting how whenever any part of the white media claims these third world countries have democratic institutions, it's always some sock puppet organization paid for by U.S. government money. The U.S. sets up some dummy front organizations in these third world countries, then the white media says these are democratic institutions, when the people of these countries had nothing to do with setting them up, that they don't control them, they don't fund them, and they don't operate in the people's interest. But this is what the white media calls democratic institutions. It's word salad, rhetorical gibberish, but most people don't actually read the bodies of these articles. They only read the headlines, so most of the time the white media gets away with it. In this case, you can see just how blatant the propaganda is. They didn't even attempt to hide it. If you read the article, they just come right out and say it. The only thing that they actually gave a definition for was Somaliland's willingness to take orders from Israel, because that's what engagement with Israel means. They bark out the orders, and you follow them. They don't care about actual democracy, because Saudi Arabia, which the U.S. also backs, is not a democracy at all, and has carried out all kinds of human rights violations, and has all kinds of corruption, and has served to support radical Islamist groups around the world. So why is it that neither Fox News nor the U.S. government, Republican and Democrat administrations alike, ever demonizes the Saudis? Because the Saudis still play ball on what really matters, selling oil at a low price to American multinational petroleum companies. Terrorism and exporting radicals is a small price to pay, really. And the same goes for Somaliland. They'll give Israel, and through them the U.S., a beachhead on Africa that they currently don't have. Israel is the only country to recognize this breakaway region. Nobody else has, not even the United States. So it's crazy and stupid for Fox News to be talking about this as if there's some huge groundswell of support for Somaliland, and that all these other countries can't wait to recognize them too. This is just another example of the incompetent white media trying to conjure magic. That's what this is about. They're going to go ahead and put these stories out there for the world to see. They're going to say, oh, there's just all this support. People love Somaliland. There's no reason not to recognize it. Israel has, so the rest of you got to do it too. I mean, it's just so irresistible. It's just so obvious how right this is. And what they're expecting is other people will be dumb enough and gullible enough to read it and go, yes, it's obvious how right this is. That's what this is about. What they know is that a sitting member of Congress, Ilhan Omar in this case, is basically saying she's not in favor of it, and as a Somali citizen, when she objects to this, at the very least it will be carried by international media. And that's the reason why Fox News is getting all hot and bothered about this, and they're taking shots at her. They need everybody to get in line so they can put forward a united front for this, and for everybody to get on the same page, the same way that they are about overthrowing the government in Venezuela. There's currently over 150 countries that recognize Palestine as a legitimate state, over the huge objections of Israel, but of course the U.S. isn't one of them. Now, that's an actual example of an organic and genuine international statehood. That was accomplished by honest international consensus, and not the U.S. throwing around money, influence, or the white media carpet bombing people with propaganda and threats to strong-arm them into doing it. And yet, neither false news nor any other white media outlet ever reported the fact that the Palestinians have internal security and democratic institutions. The entire reason Hamas even came to power was precisely because they had a free and fair election. In fact, when Israel began its genocide in Gaza, the Israeli government specifically said that they were justified in killing the Gazan civilians because the people of Gaza voted for Hamas. And as a result, the civilians in Gaza were also legitimate targets now. The only difference between Gaza, Palestine, and Somaliland is that the Palestinians do not have, nor do they want, a closer engagement with the Israeli government. They're not willing to let the US or Israel put them on strings. This is all propaganda meant to forward an expansion of white power, and the irony is excruciating that this is happening in Somalia at this moment. Of course, it would be stupid to say that this is all a coincidence. As I've always taught you, nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy. This is all part of an agenda, a list of objectives that white power is working its way through. But it's no accident at all that the Somalians are the main ones feeling the wrath. This is what happens when you dance with the devil. You gotta keep doing the old satanic two-step even when your feet are bleeding and the flesh on the soles of your feet has been worn all the way down to the bones. You see, times like this, what the Somalians could really use would be friendly internal elements inside the United States at the grassroots level who would push back against this obvious neo-colonialism. You know, the same way foundational black Americans did on behalf of the South Africans during the 60s, 70s, and 80s until apartheid fell. Calling this stuff out, that kind of internal pressure makes these sort of colonial adventures a lot more fraught with peril, a lot more difficult to pull off, precisely because you got people who are lighting them up and calling it out. That's not going to happen in this case. Instead, what's going to happen is you're going to have the one lonely voice of Ilhan Omar, the embattled, beleaguered, and probably soon to be indicted representative from Minnesota, giving her objections, and the white media will be pushing an avalanche of propaganda telling everybody, you can't take a Somalian's word for it. After all, what happens in Somalia can't be left up to the Somalians. It should instead be left up to Benjamin Netanyahu and a bunch of white blowhards from the American Enterprise Institute. They know much more what's in Somalia's interest than, say, the Somalians themselves. The Somalians have spent generation after generation doing everything they could to separate themselves from foundational black Americans, even to separate themselves from being black. So the argument that this is racial somehow, that's not going to fly because the Somalians themselves declare that nothing that happens to them really is racial if these white supremacists are doing it. They thought to themselves that they were playing a cute little game that they were guaranteed to win. But white supremacy always stacks the deck in its own favor. I'm not sure exactly how this Somaliland misadventure is going to pan out. Are the Israelis actually going to be able to drive a permanent wedge? And will this result in the kind of momentum that actually helps Somaliland to say we're separate and that's the end of that? The people who have been declaring themselves Somaliland, they've been doing it for a while now. It's not something that only happened in the last few weeks. It's been going on for many years. And is this going to be the tipping point where it becomes official? I guess we'll see. So far, Israel is the only country that's quote-unquote recognized Somaliland, and they don't really have any sort of influence, though their patron, the United States, does. No other country has joined in, and I can't really see other countries rushing to do so, mainly because why would you want to? What purpose does it serve? It's not a matter of humanitarianism or altruism on these other countries' part. It's just a matter of why recognize a place that can't benefit you or have any sort of advantage for you anyway. There's no upside in doing so. So there's also no downside in just remaining quiet about it. But as we've seen in so many other countries before, it's precisely that inaction by the international community that these bad actors are counting on. And do you seriously believe that anybody in Africa is going to be coming to Somalia's aid and saying, wait a minute here, we see what's going on here? These are the same guys who also sit back and don't do anything. The African Union has not put out any of the fires over there, and it hasn't acted as a firewall against European and American encroachment either. They've basically just been a useless continental social club. So white power is back at work in the motherland, carving the place up, and there's nobody whatsoever to stop it. And there are other people who are going to be looking and going, well, surely you black Americans, you're going to do something about this, right? And the answer is no. When people put their foot down and say, we're not anything like you, we're going to divide from you, we're going to separate ourselves from you, we want to be isolated from you, we want nothing to do with you, okay, fine. At some point, people are going to have to actually live with their decisions and the consequences that go along with it. It gives me absolutely no pleasure to see what's happening in Somalia because I understand that this is exactly what the enemy's been doing all over the world. The problem is that nobody in Somalia seems to recognize that reality. And this is the result. And the only ones who can't see the fact that it's not going to stop here are the tethers. They love to live their lives with their heads in the sand or tucked somewhere else. But for those of us in the black grassroots, we have been warning the Africans for the longest time that there's a number of political and ethnic fault lines that exist there and that they need to knock it off with all the tribalism and all of this sectarianism because this breeds the grounds where the white supremacists can just walk in and take over without a shot fired. And here they are doing it all over again. For generations now, the Africans in Africa and the immigrants from Africa have talked down to foundational Black Americans, have tried to belittle us and condescend to us, and talk to us as if we don't know anything, when the reality is we've been telling them some unpleasant truths about what they've been doing, their place in the world, and the buddies that they've tried to snuggle up to, unpleasant truths that they didn't want to hear. And their response to our care, compassion, and friendship has been to use all kinds of deflections and projections against us. And by the way, since the Israelis are now trying to get their hooks into the Horn of Africa, keep in mind, the Ethiopians were talking big trash about foundational Black Americans, ridiculing us, mocking us, repeating all of white power's anti-Black tropes like the big lie that, well, every other group, they go from poverty to prosperity in only one generation, etc. Pack of lies. But that's what the Ethiopian Prime Minister was saying about us. And I wouldn't be surprised at all, with all of the political chaos in Ethiopia, if the next group of sectarians who declare their quote-unquote independent state comes from Ethiopia. Well, I sure hope that those Somalian imams who are talking trash about foundational Black Americans, I hope that they go ahead and do a sermon about this. It's their home country, and I'm sure they're going to be telling everybody about how united they are now, right? This is what happens when you lie to yourself. When a people's loyalty to one another is broken, it's not long at all before some outsiders decide to break up their land, too. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Leonard Cottingham, Rebellious Zoe, Krishan Span, Mark Singleton, and Sharice Matthews. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.